1 year ago, I started to make this jungle oasis, something that most people will never get to see in their home and would have to get on a plane and travel across the ocean to go visit. The idea was to bring a slice of an Asian jungle into my living room. And after months and months of planning and doing, it only took 3 nights for the reticulated pythons to destroy it. So now it's time for nature to heal. I was truly very proud of this project. It looked amazing and had really big full plants, giant alocasias that the frogs absolutely loved. Smaller plants on the floor, and then mid-range plants, making a canopy of sorts, although not really, and it left a lot of unused space up above. And then we had cover on the ground so that it felt like a jungle floor, which gets very little light, or at least a lot less than would be at the top. I don't think in version 1 of this, which we saw in June in this video right here, I did a very good job of doing that. It was all kind of the same, although it did look pretty, and especially once you turn the misting system on, I think it looked all right. It just seemed like it was a little bare. Almost everything was planted from the jungle floor. That's what we'll call it. We need a name. I know Mikey Bustos at Ants Canada kind of coined the idea of making an enclosure like this and then naming it. Although I did start this before I knew about his Pandora project, which, by the way, is so freaking amazing. But we need a name for this. Let's name it so we don't have to call it the rainforest or jungle or whatever I call it. Everything was planted mostly from the floor. And when you go into a jungle, whether it be in Central South America or Asia, a lot of the stuff isn't growing from the ground. A lot of it is growing from crevasses or crevices in rock walls. It's growing off of trees, things like that. I planted everything on the ground, and I tried to plant some bromeliads in the crevices of the logs and some moss and things like that. The problem was, well, a few things. The big one, of course, was putting reticulated pythons in, which destroyed absolutely everything. This big, beautiful alocasia, destroyed. Now, it's still back there, and it's put out 2 mini kind of babies, but it's got 2 plants from the main mother plant, and those are much smaller and never grew to the same height. And this enclosure has a lot of space. In height, it's 6 feet tall. And thank you to Custom Reptile Habitats and Maximum Reptile. Full disclosure, they sent me this enclosure. They didn't tell me what to say. No money exchanged hands. They're not paying me, and I don't make a commission if you buy one. But I will say, if you're looking for large enclosures, there are none as good or even close, even in the same ballpark that I've tried as Custom Reptile Habitats. I go into more detail in the last video from June, but this enclosure went together really easy, very simple to make, all of it usable. Even for the size, it's pretty lightweight, and then I could move it around pretty easily. Custom Reptile Habitats has it figured out. I highly recommend. Thank you guys so much for sending me this amazing enclosure. I'm going to continue to make it as cool as it can possibly be. Really nothing grew from the floor tall enough to make it look like you're looking into a jungle rather than looking at a garden, basically. And I did try to plant some moss and things like that, but the substrate I planted it on wasn't right. It didn't hold enough moisture, and there was too much airflow at the very top. So a lot of the plants didn't do well. The substrate wasn't right for some of them, which we never really fixed. We just chose different plants. There was nothing growing out of the wall, and there was too much airflow, which wasn't good for the moss and some of the plants. Plus the animal selection, I decided before I didn't want to do a region of the world. I just went willy-nilly. I had reticulated pythons from Indonesia. I had White's tree frogs, which are from Australia. They're from Indonesia too, but not where these specific retics were from. And then I had giant day geckos, and those are from Madagascar, so it just didn't really work. And of course I had an Amazon milk frog too, which again, just doesn't work. I mean, it all worked, it was fine. It would have been fine if I used fake plants, but the big giant snakes destroyed everything. So here's how we fixed all that. I got rid of the retics, and I got rid of everything in this enclosure. Originally, my goal was to make it a South American or Central American type theme, and I love dart frogs. They're one of my favorite animals on the entire planet, but the White's tree frogs would have eaten them. So I changed it. Starting from the ground up, we added a little bit more substrate, added some different mediums to grow plants just a little bit better. The main thing is I wanted things to grow from something other than the ground. So we used fishing line and sphagnum moss, and we took some plants that had been growing for a while in the greenhouse that were quarantined, took all of the dirt off of the roots, put the roots into a ball of sphagnum moss, and then put the sphagnum moss on a piece of cork using fishing line. This is really easy. It takes almost no time, no effort. Just keep in mind, we'll talk about it, some plants did better than others. And then I used screws to screw these cork pieces into the background. We use some anthurium species. I love these Philodendron patriciae or Patricia. I've got a couple of those in there, and the one in the corner is just absolutely taking off. Got some other philodendrons, and then I tried to put some more coraquinums or queen anthuriums on the back, and those ones just didn't do well. To address the airflow situation and the humidity, because we want it to be humid but not too humid, and we do need some airflow. So at the beginning we had a fan at the top, 2 fans actually, and they're open screen areas. So what I did is I closed off about 90% of that screen area with acrylic that I bought on Amazon. It's just the really cheap flimsy stuff. And the reason I use this is I didn't need it to have any sort of rigidity. I just laid it over top of the actual screen, and that way it blocks the air from evaporating out of it. And some of the plants are doing so unbelievably well. The alocasia polys are growing like crazy. This dragon scale alocasia is just going absolutely nuts. And what I love about alocasias is most of them are pretty cheap to buy, really easy to grow. They don't die basically for any reason other than retics trampling on them. And they put out these corms where they grow babies from the bottom, and you can either move them or just let them grow and they become kind of like the way bananas grow, kind of like a patch of alocasias. We had some other philodendrons start to just take over as well, and as we keep going, I think that we're going to see these things really fill out. The Dieffenbachia as well was just absolutely destroyed, and that one really rebounded and is growing really nicely. I like the green, but I also like the pops of color as well. And if you have any suggestions of what to put in here, whether it be on the ground or the method that I use to put on the back walls, I'd be happy to take your advice and maybe put something else in there for the next update. And we kept on experimenting. The bromeliad is doing really well. We added a philodendron Wickens there, which is going to take over. I know this because I have it in a lot of my other jungle setups, and they all look absolutely amazing. And we replaced the queen with a king, put it on the back wall, but you guys aren't here for plants. So let's talk about how we stocked this bad boy. This time I wanted it to be from a specific region, or at least very close. So I was thinking Central and South America. But then I thought, why do that? Let's just make it all of the Americas and animals that live in very similar environments. So what I wanted to use for the focal piece is the only animal that's not in here right now, and that is an emerald tree boa. The reason I don't have the emerald tree boas in there, although I have a couple of pairs and they're doing great, one of them I just still think is not ready to go. I got them very, very sick. The female is doing great. The male still needs help eating, and we've had this animal since January of 2024, so this year. But we're talking 11 months ago, almost 12 months ago. And we're just working on it to make sure that he's healthy enough to put in there. So we might put the female in there first just to see how it goes. And the other pair of emeralds that I have are too big, and they're going to get their own enclosure that doesn't have natural plants, because I think that they're going to do the same thing to this enclosure that the retics did, and I'd really like to avoid that. Either way, when we put the snakes in, we're going to observe, and if they start to do the same thing, I'm not letting it go, I'm taking them out. But this enclosure, again, is 1,500 gallons, or very close, 8 foot long, 4 foot deep, and 6 foot high. So 13 and change, something like that. And what I wanted is an ecosystem. So I added some frogs for the ground. I wanted some animals that were diurnal species that were going to move around. And for that, I chose dart frogs. Now, this is a big disclaimer. Don't keep different species or even localities of dart frogs together. I think this is a bad idea in almost every circumstance. And there's a few reasons. First of all, crossbreeding is not good for dart frogs. A lot of dart frogs we can't bring in anymore. It's just a bad idea to muddy up the gene pool. So if you don't take my advice and you do keep dart frogs together of different species or locality, don't breed them or don't sell the babies. Another thing is aggression. Some dart frog species will beat up the other ones and then eventually they'll just perish. So these are the two main reasons that dart frogs being kept together in the same enclosure is very frowned upon. And I'm going to get a lot of hate for this video because that's exactly what I'm doing. Now keep in mind, this is a ton of floor space. 32 square feet of floor space, plus there's a lot of elements closer to the ground that almost double the area that these frogs will use. Low-lying plant leaves, water bowls, things like that. So in this enclosure, I've got 3 types of dart frog. I've got these green sips, which are a Dendrobates species, and I've got these Terribilis. These are a Philobate species. So these species cannot interbreed. Now, the issue would be, will they fight with each other? The answer is no. If they had a smaller enclosure, if I had an enclosure that was a 4x2 maybe, or even smaller, a lot of people keep dart frogs in smaller enclosures, I wouldn't keep different species like that. The only reason I'm doing it is because they have so much space, and of course, we observe this enclosure. We have a camera on it where we can check our phones at any time, and oftentimes while I'm sitting at my desk, literally my Google Home is just this enclosure. I'm watching it all day long. And so far, we haven't lost a single frog. And we have one lonely Oyapock. And the reason is I had 3 of them. 2 of them didn't make it before I put them in this enclosure. This guy was lonely for a very long time, and I decided to put him in there because they're very similar to the green sips, and as long as they don't fight, then they're good, and they don't. Next, I wanted something that was diurnal, that was going to be above the ground, and for this, I decided green anoles. There's a bunch of different species that would have worked better because they are more of a Central South American animal, where this is an animal from, well, the US, Florida, even parts of Texas, the Carolinas, things like that. But they're really easy to find, they're really easy to get, they're easy to quarantine in different enclosures that I have, and of course, they're really fun to watch. They're bright green. I mean, a lot of other options either were too expensive, they were cost prohibitive, or just they were kind of boring to look at. Although I do plan to put morning geckos in here too, because that'd be kind of fun. Lastly, I wanted a nocturnal animal that was going to be small and move around, so that when I went to look at night, it wasn't just the emeralds moving around, it was also something smaller, and something that the emeralds wouldn't eat, because that's the important thing. I didn't want any of these animals to prey on each other. So last year we had some really good luck breeding our red-eye tree frogs in an enclosure upstairs, which I can't wait to make that video because that enclosure is a mini one of these basically. And all the babies we decided to raise up old enough that the anoles wouldn't eat them, and we let them go in here. So you don't really see them during the day. You have to flip leaves over. They're very good at hiding. But at night, you can watch them move around, and it is an absolute pleasure to watch. The future of this enclosure, there's a few things that I really would like to fix. First of all, there are some plants that need to be removed because they're not doing great, replaced with other plants. That's fine. Also, the substrate that we used, I feel like could use a little bit of TLC, maybe adding some peat moss and maybe adding some other elements to make it a little bit fluffier, because we had that issue where we couldn't keep the humidity, so we turned the misters up and it just saturated the soil, and then it became very packed down. So you can see a lot of the tarp. And from the video from June, we described how we made this, so check that out. But the idea to make it waterproof is we used a pond liner, and you can really see the pond liner now because the substrate has packed down enough. So to add bushy plants to the outside perimeter, or at least definitely on this side over here, the left side when you're looking at it, so that it doesn't show as ugly as it is what we're going to do next. Also, I'd like to add more plants on the back just to try to make it look more green. I like the idea of these plants kind of sort of looking like they're coming out of a rock wall, but I'd like to see more of them and them start to fill in the background. Of course, I'm going to add the snakes, and that is going to be in the next video. If you want to see an update for this enclosure, I would absolutely love if you left me a comment. Let me know what you think. If you have some things that you like about it, don't like, any suggestions, I'd really appreciate it. Always, thanks for the Patreon supporters. You guys got this video early. All the videos are early for you, discounts on merch, all that and more for as little as $1 a month. And of course, if you hit like and subscribe, it's free and that helps the channel a ton. We do videos Mondays and Thursdays, so I'll see you in the next one.